Well, in today's Life and Career Corner, I have the opportunity to discuss how to be a pilot, how to become a pilot with Mick Donnelly, senior Australian pilot. Mick, thanks for joining us here today.
Thanks, Steffi. Great to be here.
Can you take us through your career journey, Mick? How did this interest in aviation first come about?
Well, really, it was just, as a small kid, I lived under the flight path in Sydney, and, you can't help but look up and wonder what is going on there. And I showed a bit of an interest in it, talked to my mum about it, and she, for my 16th birthday, she bought me an introductory trial flight at Bankstown Airport in Sydney in a little Cessna 152, and I was pretty much hooked from that flight.
On that flight, what was it about that flight that hooked you into wanting to become a pilot or be involved in flying?
Really just a sense of freedom, the idea of being able to travel, feeling a little bit of fear, excitement, really, I think, were the main things.
And when you later on, you had to wait to become a pilot. So at what age did you start looking into actually getting into this field?
Well, as soon as I left school at 18, I went out to the secondary airport in Sydney, Bankstown, and investigated a few options with different flying schools. And then, of course, money was an issue because you have to privately sponsor yourself, back in those days anyway. And so I had to do various menial jobs and all sorts of different things to pay for my flying. So it took a little bit longer than it would have if I just had the money sitting aside. But it was very rewarding anyway. You learn some life skills along the way while you're doing other jobs. And so it took me about 3 years to complete the training out at Bankstown Airport in Sydney.
Do some people, Mick, have to go through the military? Do some people go that route? If they can't afford, it's an expensive training, do they go to the military instead?
Absolutely, yeah. The military is one option. There was a really big commitment at the time of 12 years, and at 18, that seemed like a lifetime. So, sure. And it's also a very rigorous selection process. They go through psychological testing, very strict physical. Also, a lot of people miss out just for a small minor problem in their eyes or hearing that normally wouldn't affect your life at all. But for the military, it shows up as a flag, and the application process is stopped right there. So.
Sure. And talk to us about the training. What happens in learning to become a pilot? What are the expectations, and what do you go through?
Well, initially, you just learn to take off and land. So you just literally take off. You fly a circuit, which is just like a lap of the airfield, and then come back and land. So, and you do it in really fine weather and sun shining and not a lot of wind.
Not the reality, right? Not the reality always.
Yeah, and then you slowly go out into what they call a training area. They have a designated area which is not too far from the airfield, and you go out there with the instructor, and then eventually they let you go out there by yourself, but you're not allowed to go outside of those confines. And then once you've passed the first basic test, then they let you go further and further afield, and things get more advanced.
Do they take you step by step with the training? Because it must be very intimidating at first. What is the most intimidating part of learning to fly a plane?
Well, I think it's not a natural thing to be up in the air. So you got to overcome that initial just fear of being above the ground. And so most people talk about their initial flight, their first solo, as a very memorable experience. It's sort of pretty fixed in most pilots' mind, their first flight, because you're pretty nervous.
For sure. You remember yours very well?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. it's all a blur. It's sort of a blur, but vivid at the same time.
Yeah. So after 3 years of training, what kind of theory? Do you go through a lot of theory as well as the practical flying that you have to learn in terms of safety and flying an airplane?
Yeah, so there's a syllabus. There's a private pilot's license, which a lot of people have if they're just a recreational pilot. And then you go on and you can do your commercial pilot license, and then your airline transport pilot license. So there's 3 steps of theory. There's a curriculum set out for that, and there's various ways you can do that. You can do it through TAFE colleges back then, and or sort of private study through a flying school. But these days you can actually do it as part of a university degree. I think in North America you've been able to do it that way for quite some time, but it was only very new when I started, 20 years ago.
And what is the difference? Have you flown both private and commercial, Mick? Have you done both sides of aviation?
Well, I suppose yes, because you start off as a private pilot where you just you can take up friends and family, and but you're not allowed to do it for what they call hire and reward. So you can't charge somebody to go be a passenger in your aircraft until you have a commercial pilot's license. It was interesting that for the first 5 or 6 years of my career, because I was flying small airplanes, I considered myself a commercial pilot, but people who don't fly were always asking me, when are you going to become a commercial pilot?
So to become a commercial, what is the major difference? You're responsible for more people.
Not necessarily. You can be a commercial pilot and fly a small airplane. It's just that idea that people are being charged. So my first flying job was on a cattle station, mustering cows. So actually herding cattle into a cattle yard using an airplane. That actually came under the private category. And then the next job I had was flying people to and from Aboriginal communities all throughout the northwest of Australia, and they were being charged to go there. So I was a commercial pilot, even though there was only 6 seats and a small aircraft with a single engine.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What kind of skill does it take people to be a pilot? What do you think makes a good pilot?
I think the biggest one is just commitment and just discipline. You need to have a certain amount of hand-eye coordination. So, definitely. But just, commitment and discipline to making sure that you're very thorough with checking things, and you're very conscious of the safety aspects and how important they are.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what are some of the myths that people have about pilots? What are some of the generalizations that aren't true today?
Well, I suppose the biggest one is that the plane flies itself.
Yes, I would think so. Can you how did that even come to be?
Well, we joke that we put the autopilot on very quickly after takeoff, and you can even land the aircraft on the autopilot. But a lot of work goes into programming the aircraft to do what it needs to do. And if you mess up the programming, it won't do it. And you still have to continuously tell the autopilot what you want it to do. You may not be physically pulling on a control column or a side stick in the case of an Airbus, but you're still very much in control of the aircraft. So I suppose that's probably one of the biggest myths. People think we're just sitting there reading the paper the whole day long. And
yeah, that's quite a myth. That's quite a myth. What about, can you take us through, what is a day like in the life of a pilot? So the type of pilot that you are, can you give us, I know a typical day is probably hard, but give us an idea of what a day can be like.
Well, the alarm goes off at 3 something in the morning.
Wow. Yes.
And that's difficult. It's difficult to get the appropriate rest for that, because we've all got distractions in our lives. But that's probably the start of a day when you're starting early. Signing on at the airport at 5 a.m. in the morning for a 6 a.m. flight. When we're flying domestically, we always have 1 hour to prepare. So these days we receive all our briefing information, our weather and our flight details, just online. It's all, we have apps on our iPad. Everything's iPad based. So that actually makes it easier. We can get information a bit in advance, actually signing on at work. Situation where we all, the pilots, we go through all our material that we need to have for the day. We make decisions on fuel, etc., and then we brief the cabin crew on the day, and then we normally get out to the aircraft about 40 minutes or half an hour before the actual departure, and you know, the passengers board about 20 minutes before we're actually scheduled to go. And most of the exciting stuff happens on the ground.
That's right. Right. All the preparation to get up there, right?
Yeah.
Now, what about some of your memorable flights, Mick? Do you have some flights you can share with us that were especially memorable for you as a pilot? Maybe in your early days and one of your favorite flights?
Well, when I first joined the airline that I'm with now, was 12 years ago. We were expanding rapidly, so we were continuously taking delivery of new aircraft. And I got the opportunity to go to Toulouse in France, where they make Airbus, to pick up a brand new airplane, and was involved in the acceptance of the aircraft, which is lots of rigorous testing, ground testing, and then also flight testing. At the time, I was a first officer, so I didn't conduct the actual test flight. The captain did, but I was up there for the flight in the cockpit, and it was, you know, you learn so much from that. And then once we'd accepted the aircraft, we flew it back to Australia. It took 4 days to bring it back, and we went via Dubai and Phuket and Darwin and back home, and it was yeah, amazing. Just myself, the captain, and two engineers in a brand new airplane. It only had 4 hours of flying time on it when we left Toulouse, so it's pretty amazing.
Oh, for sure it is. For sure it is. And what about the technology changes? Since you first started, what has changed in terms of what you need to know as a pilot?
Well, when I first started flying, there was a lot of you know, basic navigation using, you know, paper maps, and you'd have rulers and stuff like that. Of course, with GPS, that's really enhanced aviation and navigation accuracy and all those sort of things. So these days, we basically have what they call a paperless cockpit. So we don't have very little paper in the cockpit. Everything's either embedded in the aircraft or iPad based. So we've gone from having about 15 manuals, you know, in a whole library, to just walking on board with the iPad, and that's probably the biggest change. There's always software updates with the aircraft. There's new we've started doing a lot of what they call RMP approaches, so we can fly very accurate approaches into mountainous terrain, places like Queenstown in New Zealand. And basically fly the aircraft really accurately in cloud down a mountainous river valley, and allows you to land in much lower weather than you ever have before. So
Wow.
these are the sort of different.
You must have to, Mick, have a strong sense of comfort with a bit of fear as a pilot, because there are some scary, you said mountainous terrain, there are some scary things that can happen when you fly a plane. So how are you trained to deal with fear and situations that could go out of control?
Well, we have a program, it's called a cyclic program, that involves regular simulator testing. And we go through every 6 months, we'd spend 2 days in the simulator, 4 hours each day, where we do a training component and a testing component on emergency situations. And each time we go into the simulator, that we have different ones, and we really just concentrate on having very set methodical ways of dealing with an emergency, so that you know, when it presents itself in the aircraft, you know, we're as equipped as we can be to handle it. It's never going to happen the same as we practice it, but as long as you have a really sound sort of backbone and structure to how you're going to deal with the situation, then you should be able to do a pretty good job of the problem when it arises.
Sure. And also the challenges, you mentioned the sleep schedule and the traveling. For a pilot, how much traveling is there in your job? And I guess it depends who you work for, but generally in your career, how much are you on the road and how much are you at home?
Well, for me at the moment, I'm pretty lucky. I'm at home quite a bit because I'm involved in simulator training and examining. The way that domestic flying in Australia is organised with the airline that I work for is very much about being home at night. But that hasn't always been the case. We have bases all over Australia. We have to relieve pilots in other ports, so you might go for a week at a time, a week, a month away, or sometimes two. But we have the aircraft that I fly, the A320, is mostly domestic based. We have a Boeing 787, the Dreamliner, which flies into Asia, Honolulu, and those guys are away a lot more. They fly a lot through the night, even though we fly through the night as well quite a bit. And so they're the challenges that you face there. A lot of the night flying is quite difficult to adjust to.
Are you pretty strict with your sleep schedule because of that?
Well, it's sort of difficult to be strict, especially if the times are changing. So you might sometimes start, have that alarm go off at 3 something in the morning, and 2 days later start work at 9 at night and finish at 7 in the morning. So that's extreme. It's not supposed to happen. It does happen from time to time, but that's really, really hard to plan for. So you just have to really get sleep when you can. And, there are times when you just can't. And, generally we try and encourage people, if they don't feel fit to go to work and feel fit to fly, that they don't, because, fatigue is difficult to recognize sometimes, and it doesn't actually show itself up until you're put into a stressful situation. So.
Right. So they're very encouraging of being open and honest of when you are overtired and it's not safe for you to fly.
Yeah, generally we try and encourage people to do that. Yeah, I mean, as amongst the pilot group anyway.
Right. And do you have any tips for people who think they would like to be a pilot or they would like to become a pilot? What would you say to people interested in this field?
Go for it. No, look, it's difficult. There's a lot more avenues now available. So the path that I took, which was to fly in all sorts of remote areas around Australia. I flew in Southern Africa for a couple of years and smaller airlines into a bigger airline. There's a cadetship avenue now, which is you can be taken on with no flying experience whatsoever. The airline commits to training you and takes you from, we call it a 0 flight time course right through to flying an Airbus within about a 3-year period. So there's lots of different avenues to look at. I'd say look at all the avenues, see what's right for you, but be prepared to have a lot of knockbacks, some hard times. You're not going to make a lot of money for a long time, quite often.
Yes. And the lack of sleep isn't glamorous, right?
No. The idea of staying in fancy hotels around the world sounds great, but, you're away from friends and family. You're rostered to be there with people that you're not of your choosing. A lot of the time it's fantastic and a lot of the destinations are fantastic, but sometimes you're just filling in time. So there's quite a bit of boredom sometimes in that sort of situation, but the upsides are definitely outweigh those things. So I would just focus on those. Focus on the idea that you do get to travel with your job. You're in a job that no 2 days are the same. You do get quite a bit of time off to do other things outside of work. I would definitely, for someone who's looking into it, investigate what it is to be a pilot. Look at, there's some forums that are available where up and coming pilots are on, established pilots are on, talking about what the life is like. If you can go down to local airfield, talk to some people down there about potential career paths, and just use your friends and family network. Most well, a high percentage of people involved in aviation have family members or friends that have done it before, I feel, and they get that sort of advice or the desire to do it through that.
Sure, sure. And any really important question, any favorite aviation movie about flying that you have?
Oh, every pilot loves Top Gun, right?
Everybody wants to be a Tom Cruise, I guess, for a moment, right? Okay, Top Gun, Top Gun. You didn't see Flight with Denzel Washington?
Oh, we all like that one too, but you got to be careful with that one.
Yes, just a little careful, just a little careful. Well, Mick
Yeah.
Donnelly, thank you for sharing your experience and the good and the bad and the all the sides of being a pilot, so people get some glimpses into what it means and the exciting career path that you've taken. So thank you for being with us in today's Life and Career Corner.
Thanks, Steffi.